Hello everyone to the last and third iteration of events in the game Echo. That is part of a game that we developed, well, we didn't develop the game, but a work that we developed with the Mycological Twist, and that is currently being shown at the Athens Biennale until the end of November. And so we had two different events so far where we invited different speakers, and this is the last of these events. Today we will have as a speaker Lola Olufemi, Xenia Chiaramonte, and Laura Op de Beke. And so I'm just going to introduce the different.
Before that, I would like to thank a group of caretakers that has been with us, joining us in game, experimenting in different ways, trying to set up a community in this game where you can construct different elements, but everything you do leaves a type of pollution. So a big thanks goes to these caretakers: Viktor Timofeev, Steph Holl-Trieu, Kitty Clark, Raphaelle Cormier, Parrr Geng, and Marcel Darienzo. And another thanks goes to Strange Loop Games that allowed us to use 20 copies of this game and set up a server for us.
And of course, big thanks to Omsk Social Club and Larry Osemansaf and the Athens Biennale for inviting us to do this game. In 2 days, the game will destruct itself, there will be a meteor that will crash in the game. So, this is really a farewell moment in a way. Okay.
Yeah, the game will be able to. You can still play that game after the asteroid hits our planet. So, if you have interest in joining the game yourself, you can always send an email to events@athensbiennale.org in order to gain access to the game and join this world.
So I'm now going to introduce the different speakers for today. So the first speaker is Lola Olufemi. She's a black feminist writer and researcher from London. She's co-author of A Fly Girl's Guide to University from Vers Poetry Press in 2019, author of Feminist Disrupting Power, from Pluto Press 2019, and Experiments on Imagining Otherwise, forthcoming from Ajar Press in 2021. She's a member of Bare Minimum, an interdisciplinary anti-work art collective, and the recipient of the 2020 Techne AHRC doctoral training partnership between the Stratholt Foundation, CRIM, and Westminster School of Art. Her work focuses on the uses of feminist imagination, its relationship to futurity, political demands, and imaginative revolutionary potential. Alongside writing, she facilitates reading groups, workshops, occasionally curates, and is volunteer coordinator at the Feminist Library in South London. The next speaker is going to be after that Xenia Chiaramonte. She's a jurist and a social legal scholar. She's currently a fellow at the Institute for Cultural Inquiry in Berlin. She recently published her monograph, Governing Conflict, the Criminalization of the No-TAV Movement in 2019, which analyzes the criminalization of one of the most long-standing and high-profile environmental movements in Western Europe. In her research, she developed a deep ethnographical approach blended with a theory-oriented vision. Xenia Chiaramonte has been broadly interested in the intersection of law and social movements. Her research has gone from the negative relationships between public law, criminal and... Okay, my app just crashed. Sorry about that. Criminal and... Yes. Criminal and administrative, and protest to a project on a new social institution designed to enhance the legal capacity to craft a fictional conception of nature. And the last speaker will be Laura Op de Beke. She's a game scholar, cultural critic and a PhD fellow at the University of Oslo, where she is the principal investigator of the collaboratory Playing with Deep Time, which brings together people of interest interested in the exploration of deep time using playful storytelling practice like Nordic LARP and other forms of roleplay. Her doctoral thesis look at what she calls Anthropocene temporalities in video game in order to understand a new structure of feeling particular to these times, characterized by a sense of proacted crisis, anxiety over the future, apocalypticism, as well as techno-futuristic hope. Okay, and we will now start with the presentation of Lola Olufemi.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm gonna read some excerpts from my newest book called Experiments in Imagining Otherwise. So I'm first gonna start with a little piece about what the otherwise is not. Begin with these words. We want X. Then ask, what will this require? The otherwise is not a process of negotiation or a business transaction. Do not try and sell it to me like something you can flog at a flea market. It is not ingenious or entrepreneurial or even worse, innovative. It is not interested in perfecting humanity using AI or colonizing space or resplendence for everyone bought with gold stolen from Mars. It does not breathe in line with the stock market or debate the worth of granddaddy's life if he cannot work anymore. It is not like the race to cure cancer or eliminate climate change by planting trees via a search engine. It is not cleaning the seas and beaches by hand whilst BP watches. It is not an edict or a declaration of independence or a manifesto. It's not a contract to sign or bargaining for better pay or a 4-day work week. Even if it looks like a contract, don't sign it. End with these words. I will sacrifice X. I think the second piece that I'm going to read from the book is called A Note on Design, which I think is very pertinent to this project. So this is called A Note on Design, and I guess it's about our capacity to think through design as more than just the things that we make. A note on design. This is a quote by June Jordan that opens this piece. She says, quote, I would wish us to indicate the determining relationship between architectonic reality and physical well-being. I hope that we may implicitly instruct the reader in the comprehensive impact of everywhere, of any place. This requires development of an idea or theory of place in terms of human being, of space designed as the volumetric expression of successful existence between earth and sky, of space cherishing as it amplifies the experience of being alive, the capability of endless beginnings and the entrusted liberty of motion, of particular space connected to multiple spatialities, a particular space that is open receptive and communicant, yet sheltering particular life, end quote. We don't think that the layout of a house or a street can determine our capacity for being. Living as we do, on top of one another, with no room to stretch our legs or for our children to play, and being so isolated, not knowing our next door neighbors, not knowing whom we would depend on in an emergency, is a political question. Design is more than just an architectural component. It is more than just the arrangement of physical objects in order to make something. Design is also the speech we use to build and give meaning to the world around us. June Jordan knew this. If you changed how people conceived of living, you could also change their understanding of themselves and their relations with others, breaking the inertia of this unlivable life. The way we talk about this life and living, the language we use, builds a kind of structure that turns the horizon, that point where potentiality meets the substance of our reality, into a mirage. When we say housing for all, and the government responds with, the homeless are being temporarily housed in hotels to avoid the spread of the virus, They are building a linguistic structure that defines the realm of the possible, that implicitly tells us to want less, to expect that total reconfiguration is out of the question. Like a poorly designed building, linguistic structures affect how we think, breathe, move, and act. The mold sticks to our skin. We are familiar with a particular kind of linguistic structure, the preservation of a system of organization that places capital before all else. This system ties our hands and feet together. But if we follow Jordan, everywhere and any place has a comprehensive impact. And so everything we do and say that brings place and space into existence, that defines its contours, that explicitly makes clear who can and cannot enter, also has an impact. To get free, we have to redesign linguistic structures before they morph into linguistic loops, or in the meantime, at least get comfortable with repetition. The next bit that I'm going to read is this piece that I think is one of my favorites in the book. It's called Strike, and it's just, I guess, a reflection on what becomes possible in the moment the strike takes place. What's the mood of the general strike? I think something changes in the air. Particles rearrange themselves to spell enough kidnapping in the dead of night, murder, endless poverty stretching for miles and miles. If you observe the mood, you might be able to hear your heartbeat in your tooth and then your toenail, then the very tips of your fingers. The mood of the general strike is not in the body of man. It's burrowed deep in the earth. It begins to shake every time the past defeats itself and the clock simmers. The mood of the general strike might only be defined by what it is not. If I had to approximate, I can only say something like, imagine you are a free diver and you break the surface when you were expecting to drown. Imagine that breath, the sheer scope of it, the relief that floods through you. In Haiti and Sudan, it's hot sun and barricading the streets. For Amazon workers in America, it's union meetings in nondescript buildings. For the enslaved, it was choosing your own death, sabotaging commodity. The general strike happens when North meets South. It's when newness runs its fingers over the impasse that is the contemporary. The general strike is a point of departure. It's a strikeout, a refusal to play the game. It's a strike, the act of marking one's target. It's a strike, an act of violent insurrection. It's a strike, a correction of the old mistake. It's a strike, hard to read and even harder to describe. The mood of the general strike is solemn. It's the moment you realize you have to do something with the life you have taken back. The general mood of the general strike is the parceling out of the boss's bones to pick our teeth with. The mood of the general strike is either you are with us or you will be crushed, no nuance. The mood of the general strike is scorched earth and nobody narrating it as it happens. The mood of the general strike is when the text becomes discernible, just for a moment. The general strike is staring at what was once obscured until you can make out its edges, like you are doing now. It's recognition despite restriction, a recognition of yourself for what you are, a worker. The general strike says, instead of working for the man, let's work for love. Let's work for each other. Let's work so nobody ever has to work again. Let's work for song and for dance. Let's work in service of pleasure. Let's work and work and work so finally we can talk about something other than work. What's the colour of the general strike? Well, to know that, you have to know the colour of the future. That's easy. A mix of every colour currently imaginable, but mostly that colour that is the absence of light. You know the one. The last piece I'm going to read is a piece that opens the book. And I guess I have lots of feelings about narratives of kind of ecological crisis and disaster being the only way that we can think about the condition of living, being that, you know, lots of people in lots of different parts of the world are living and have lived in conditions of disaster their entire life, right? So what would it mean to think about disaster or the condition of disaster as not something imminent, but as something already kind of present. And I guess this speaks to that in ways. No poetry and no hope as an empty gesture of optimism. Hope as a riot or uprising or revolution or many other names. Simply steal everything, burn everything. Hope as commitment to see around and beyond unending misery. Hope to abandon hope when hope fails. Better yet, determination to own a condition of disaster. No more epicenters or dead people as catalysts or disastrous events. No more constructing the timeline, reflecting on the turn of events or ripple effects. Please, no more global v local. Only a commitment to extending the disastrous moment if it means the possibility of more living, or refusing ongoing brutalization of the self and others. Maybe no more humans and no more appeals to biology. Only determination is keep going. Use thinking to spur you on, but remember everything constructed has its limits. Think resistance strategies from the home you will eventually destroy, from the family that is an albatross around your neck, from the prison of identification. No resistance that retains private property or the machine of the critical professional. Resistance as tension and incompleteness, as a call to tell the truth. Tell the truth about the tightrope of black life in the midst of disaster. The future depends on it. Decide to become illegible. No universal, no binding struggle that means one thing and only one thing at any given time. Only pockets of continuous action, non-action, faceless contribution, thankless labor, all in the spirit of, quite simply, we will not tolerate suffering. Repetition. Here are strategies for resistance. They're not total, they're not right, they are there. Pick them up and put them down depending on the horror of the day. Don't waste time being surprised by the horror. No more performance for surveillance capital and friends. Whisper only one promise, to remain steadfast in the belief that this cannot be all there is. Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation to read.
Thank you. It was a very nice composition of text, and I think they reflect very well with the game and different questions that we've been wondering also with this game in relation to doing things in there or not, and how it's tied to this idea of labor also, but it's still a game somehow. So thank you so much for your contribution, Lola.
We'll move on to the recording of Xenia, and for that I will have to switch to from the microphone to my phone to play that recording, so you will hear some weird sounds in between, but that's that.
Since the middle of the 20th century, a phantom has been sweeping across the globe. The phantom of development. Although most people do not believe in ghosts, at one time they at least believed in development, were influenced by development, pursued development, worked for development, lived from development. Development is oriented toward the future. Progress has been our way to keep a distance from the soil, to forget the present, to obscure the past, to keep on looking at the future without living the present, or rendering the present and the future unlivable. Why did you separate me from the earth? Ecology is the science that studies the interactions of organisms with each other and with their physical surroundings. Ecology has been conceived as not only the science of the whole, but also as an ethics that is a way to construct and develop a better relationship between human and non-human entities and their surroundings, a branch of knowledge that aspires to create a fairer and less harmful cohabitation among all the species that inhabit the planet. However, etymologically, ecology also denotes a science of the house. Eco, oikos, house. The problem of establishing an effective environmental ethics lies in this root. In his magnum opus, the Economia Naturae, Isaac Biberg, a pupil of Linnaeus, constructed the domestic metaphor that casts its shadow on today's ecology. Concepts formulated in accordance with this metaphor include that of ecosystem, place or household where certain species live, or the defense of the environment as a protective modality that encloses the household of the living. Before the theory of evolution, species were thought to be immutable. Hence, the relationship between species was explained by the creationist hypothesis. There is the existence of a common divine creator of all things. With the German zoologist Ernst Haeckel, we pass from the economy of nature to the new term ecology. But on closer inspection, the relationship with the household, the economy in the mercantile sense, continues to dominate today's ecology, as do numerous related theological concepts. First, order and utility are concepts that issue from this genealogy of the domestic. Under these principles, the world would correspond to an ordered set of ecosystems, each assigned to their own house, that must be protected in order to keep their usefulness intact. The corresponding idea of returning to a pristine condition is full of theological inspiration, but alas, there is no garden and never has been. This widespread view is misleading for several reasons. This perspective implies that human beings are responsible for defending the environment conceived as nature. And even if the ultimate aim of ecology is to resituate humans as part of the environment, thereby reaffirming them as parts of nature rather than dominant actors, the concept of defending or protecting nature inevitably leads back to the dualism between man and nature, into the human exceptionalism. Also, conceiving the environment as an entity to be defended once again establishes nature in economic and proprietary terms as a resource to be exploited or not exploited, as something to be fenced off for the purposes of containment or defense. This vision, among other things, implies something like the park form, defense of the wilderness. Thus, this vision, among other things, implies something like the park form, defense of the wilderness, thus refusing to recognize that today we are faced with an extremely more complex issue, the challenge of the intrusion of Gaia. The metaphor of the house does not work. It is also because every species migrates by definition, and even when it is first of all the planet that migrates, as we know from the theory of continental drift. A parliament of things. Maybe it's time for that. But how do we make things express their desires? What's the legal place of things? Of raw materials, of a mountain, a river, an ocean? do these things possess rights? How they can exercise them? Who has the right to take legal action? Or who can assert the rights of nature in court? Whose interest is that? How can a group that claims the rights of nature arise from below, and not being the state the only one who is entitled? A hybrid? An assemblage? How can they talk and take a position? Can our autonomy do that? What is nature? Nature can be seen as the author of rights. Is nature a subject? Do we want to assimilate nature? What is nature? Human nature? Natural nature? Are we nature? Is nature a human? Are we non-human? Are you a plant? Oh, are you a river? I am a robot. I am a robot who transplants techniques, living an indigenous mode of existence. Am I respecting nature by transforming it or by eliminating myself?
Thank you, Xenia, for this beautiful, ominous text. We got attacked by some wolf in the meantime when you were wondering what was nature, so I thought that was kind of a funny answer to that in some ways. The last contribution will be Laura Op de Beke, and I think we're gonna follow her. She's just standing right there to what she did in ECHO.
Hi everyone, I hope my sound is coming through. Thank you, Xenia, for setting such a beautiful, sort of ominous, spooky mood. I think that it will segue perfectly with what I have to say here. I'm going to start by putting basically all my cards on the table. I'm concerned about climate change, and I am also upset at the unequal distribution of it. People in the global south, as well as the high Arctic, will be worst hit. In the worst case scenario, they will even be forced to abandon their homes and their lifestyles. I'm also outraged that governments, and especially oil corporations like Saudi Aramco, Chevron, Gazprom, ExxonMobil, Shell, and British Petroleum, are not held accountable for their part in the destruction the biosphere. In order to make myself heard and to exert pressure on governments to call these corporations to order, I have participated in my fair share of climate marches, many of which have been organized by the activist movement Extinction Rebellion. Last week, I was at such a march in The Hague, in the Netherlands, where I walked in solidarity for indigenous rights and climate justice. It was a march like many of the other marches I've been a part of. On the sidewalks, there were mostly supportive cheers and smiling faces, lots of love and support from strangers walking shoulder to shoulder with me, and the police were well behaved, mostly, until they weren't. There were also the usual couple of angry men, stuck in their vehicles, honking furiously, calling us names. For these men, our march presented an obstacle, a nuisance, a 10 to 20 minute delay to wherever they were going. To these men, we were a grievance. To be a grievance is the cause of a disruption. We were getting in the way of things, which was, of course, exactly the point. My talk today is essentially going to be about being a grievance and a griever, and how I try to be both in ECO. And I positioned myself on this road, which was not built by me, but which sort of conveniently links up my little cabin here over my shoulder and Louise's and Anna's campsite to the north. So if you're only just tuning in, what you're looking at is Eco, which is this incredibly big, complicated, beautiful game. It's a little bit like Minecraft, but smothered in sustainability sauce. And that sounds dismissive, but I don't really mean that. I do like Eco, and I think the developer's commitment to the game and to continuing its development and its implementation as a teaching tool is really admirable. And I think that also in the right hands, it's a great space to experiment with actions and consequences, responsibility, teamwork, and social contracts. I'm just sort of moving around a little to get you to see more of the game, I guess, provide for a more interesting visual. So there's plenty inside of this big simulation to draw players to the game, especially players who want to experience dynamic, highly detailed environments and who enjoy collaborative, albeit time-intensive labor. But there are also players who are drawn to Eco for different reasons. I often look at the Steam community forums, and on the page for Eco, I found an interesting interaction. A user named Suddenly Guns asks, quote, "What is the potential for griefing in this game? Deadly fire, looting, etc.?" End quote. A user called Rector replies, quote, "This is the game with the most griefing potential I've ever seen." End quote. Suddenly Guns responds, quote, "Thanks for the reply. Can you elaborate any further? Interested to see if this game will scratch my itch." End quote. Suddenly Guns here is asking whether this is a good game for him to indulge in griefing. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, the Urban Dictionary defines griefer, G-R-I-E-F-E-R, as someone, usually in an online game, who intentionally and usually repeatedly attempts to degrade another's experience or torment them. Griefing is kind of like trolling, but it's more specific to online games. It happens in almost every massively multiplayer online role-playing game, and it is also one of the reasons why I'm always a little nervous about playing online. When I was 10 or 11, I used to play an online game called RuneScape, which I loved, until one day someone persuaded me to hand over a self-made studded leather vest I wore so that he could improve it. Of course, once I traded him the item, he just logged off and I was left standing there in nothing but my shirt sleeves. This is an example of griefing. And in game studies, griefing can be understood as dark play. And dark play occurs when players embrace morally reprehensible subject positions, either for the sake of destructive glee or merely for the joy of being contrarian. I'm interested in dark play because one of my dissertation chapters is about oil tycoon games, where you play these cartoonishly evil oil barons. But since my time spent in Eco did not have to yield an academic paper, I was interested to explore dark play and the practice of griefing in particular in a more creative manner. So I set about creating this character, the character that you're looking at, clad all in black, who is a griefer as well as a griever, somebody who disturbs and who is disturbing, and somebody who mourns the imminent destruction of the world. As I'm sure you know, the Eco server on which we have played this last month will be hit by an asteroid on the 25th of October, so Monday, 2 o'clock. And since we were so small a group and could devote only some of our time to playing the game, we were never going to be able to progress enough to develop the technology to deflect the asteroid. So already on day one, we were living in a world that had an expiration date. Now, I don't know what the impact of the asteroid will look like. I don't know what the extent of the damage will be, or whether there will be a way to go on living among the ruins. The only surety we have is that some kind of catastrophe will strike in the near future. How do you live under the shadow of such an event? This is what I did. First of all, I considered griefing my fellow players to pass the time. And while I would never think of harassing people or being destructive in real life, game space feels different. The stakes are lower, you can be anonymous, or you can be somebody else. You can be the bad guy. There are a couple of ways in which you can grief people on Eco. So Rector, the same user I referred to earlier, suggests, quote, "In a game where the goal is to maintain the ecosystem, the easiest way to grief is just that, fuck up the ecosystem. One night with a friend and you can irreparably damage the system by cutting down most of the forest. If you want to invest a little more time, get tailings and pollute your way through the map," end quote. Then there's another user called Theriel who suggests something else. Quote, "Like, you could join a server, dig a big hole at the spawn point, claim the land, and everyone joining won't be able to get out of the hole," end quote. This is called grief claiming, and Eco allows you to claim land as your own, and to set it so that nobody can cross your land. And if my cameraman could, for example, enlarge the world map, you can sort of see in squares where people have claimed land. And if you can claim land in a sort of like area that's crucial, that's a really important sort of passage for people to get around, you can be really annoying. I mean, and it's kind of interesting to me that this sort of like property mechanic is easily abused for griefing, which is of course also true in real life. Polluters and predatory landlords are griefers who spoil the game for everybody. And if we can fight these practices in-game by calling on admin to ban certain users, what's stopping us from doing the same to our flesh and blood oppressors? But since we were such a small, friendly, collectively minded group, I ended up not griefing my fellow players, at least not intentionally. But you do have to remember that every time you build something on your property, you have to manually adjust its settings so that everybody can use it. Otherwise, the access remains limited to yourself. So instead of griefing with an F, I try to engage in grieving with a V. I wanted to come to terms with the finite nature of my experience in this dying world. And the register of grief or melancholia is very interesting to me, especially as a way to experience the climate crisis. I've written about this register before, and I always find it helpful to go back to Timothy Morton's book chapter on ecological elegy. So Timothy Morton is famous for coining the notion of dark ecology, which is a call to strip ecological discourse of its fetishization of nature as life-affirming, stable, bounteous, delicate, and beautiful, and all manner of qualities easy to love and to celebrate. Rather, dark ecology is about, quote, radical intimacy with radical strangers, end quote, which is just as often uncomfortable, gross, and disturbing. And here I have to think of the sudden snarl of a wolf or a leopard that can really startle you when you play Eco, because you might not be seeing them, but they could just be behind you. And then this quite like realistic animal sound can really sort of, startle you, sort of kind of creep you out. And I think that's a kind of like in-game example of an intimacy that's kind of unexpected and kind of disturbing. So the aesthetics of dark ecology embrace artificiality and otherness without trying to excise nature as a thing over yonder to be admired. Dark ecology is, quote, embodied not in a hippie aesthetic of life over death or a sadistic bambification of sentient beings, but in a goth assertion of the contingent and necessarily queer idea that we want to stay with a dying world, end quote. Let's move a little bit over here so that you can sort of see, you can see a little bit more of the space. Another author that I draw on to help me think about ecological grief is Catriona Mortimer Sandilands, whose chapter called Melancholy Nature's Queer Ecologies demonstrates the power of a queer ecological framework in understanding what it means to mourn environmental devastation and ecological loss. Dismissing the late capitalist framing of ecological loss, which often resorts to nostalgia, she argues instead for the power of melancholia, or a queer kind of mourning pathologized by Freud as incomplete or stunted. Unlike the nostalgic subject, the melancholic takes the mourned object into themselves and refuses to let it go, refusing to replace it with a new object attachment, which would, of course, mimic a capitalist logic of consume, replace, repeat. During the 80s AIDS crisis, melancholia was politicized in response to the lack of recognition for queer attachments, which made them ungrievable. A similarly politicized melancholia might be able to help us to hold on to and to make visible the ecological losses we are suffering as a result of the climate crisis, which are equally ungrievable because ecological loss isn't valued enough or because it hasn't happened yet, not here. To go back to Extinction Rebellion briefly, the movement is pretty famous for its sort of like morbid theatrical practices, like staging funerary processions and organizing die-ins, and these are inspired by the queer activism of the AIDS crisis. But mourning that which is still dying, right, mourning that which is in the process of falling apart, according to is tricky. According to Timothy Morton, ecological elegies often mourn a lost nature that either never was or is not even already gone. Morton questions the, quote, unseeming rhetorical rush, end quote, to mourn that which is still in the process of falling apart, and advocates instead an ethics of lingering and choking on the indigestibility of grief and death, rather than attempting to move beyond it. So in Eco, I have tried to sort of embrace this refusal to let go. I want to stick with the world right up until the very end. So this is kind of what I did. I built an underground structure. This is the structure that you're looking at right now. I'll just go stand in front of it. This is both a seed vault, a mausoleum, and a bunker at the same time. And this is where I intend to hole up, to stay, and to sort of try and be with the planet when the asteroid hits. And in front of here, on this little sign to my right-hand side, I have quoted a poem, Elegy for Country Churchyard, and this is only a paragraph from that poem. It reads, beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. There's more poetry inside of this bunker. It's also kind of like a poetic space, I guess. Maybe it's a gallery space, who knows. But it's kind of like building this bunker has really inspired me because it's kind of, I think it's intrigued me because it mixes registers from, you know, apocalypticism, survivalism, and the Gothic, right? It's a seed vault, which is kind of like a sort of techie solution to a changing world, but also it's a tomb, right? And it's also a bunker, right? And I feel like, and maybe in a sense it could also be sort of like, I don't know, like a dungeon crawl, because the space is kind of narrow and a bit claustrophobic. But let me show you around. So up above here, as above, so below, a kind of like alchemical, sort of like esoteric saying, you know, as above, so below. Let's see, you guys can still see me, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so on my left side is the seed vault. Feel free to go and check that out. There's two chests, which have all of the seeds that I found inside. Not many, not nearly enough to, I guess, you know, reseed, repopulate this world. But these are the ones that I could find at least. Then on your right-hand side, or my right-hand side, are two chests full of supplies. They're still empty because I still have some time before the asteroid hits, so I just plan to stock those with everything that we need to weather the storm, I guess. And then moving back some more, on my left-hand side is a sort of, I don't know, like a place that for it to chill and to sort of like sit and wait until, wait until it happens. And then on the right-hand side, up in here, this is the first of the poetic spaces in the bunker, in the tomb. And because I am at heart an English major, and because I was inspired by Morton's love for ecological elegy, I also looked at poems that I thought really captured some of my experience of the game. Starting with this poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, which he wrote in response to a little copse of aspens that he loved being cut down. And I think when I read it, it'll become obvious where and how it sort of fits into my experience of the game. Here goes. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun, all felled, all are felled. Of a fresh and following folded rank, not spared, not one, that dandled, a sandaled shadow that swam or sank, on meadow and river, and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. Oh, but if we knew what to do when we delve or hew, hack and rack the growing green, since country is so tender to touch, her being so slender, that, like this sleek and seeing ball, the prick will make no eye at all. Where we, even where we mean to mend her, we end her, when we hew or delve. Aftercomers cannot guess the beauty being 10 or 12, only 10 or 12, strokes of havoc unselve, this sweet especial scene, rural scene, a rural scene. So I thought this poem was relevant since so much of the game depends on chopping down trees and delving for ore and stone. I think I cut down close to 100 trees at least to build my house and to build my furniture, and even the signs on which this poem is reproduced are made from ceiba trees. Those are the spiky trees out in the jungle. And so I've chosen to dwell on this sort of uncomfortable fact that that sort of to be in this game you have to do a lot of chopping and hewing and delving, and I've chosen to do that using the Register of Ecological Elegy. Then to the other side, there's another poem. This poem sort of highlights another aspect of the gameplay experience that really stuck with me. These are 3 paragraphs from Andrew Marvell's poem, The Garden. Here goes. What wondrous life in this I lead, ripe apples drop about my head, the luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. Nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach, stumbling on melons as I pass, and snared with flowers, I fall on grass. All right. So on my first day on Planet Eco, mere seconds after spawning on a slim rocky bank jutting out into the crystal blue river, I almost got run off my feet by a stampede of animal life. An elk, a wolf, a handful of rabbits, and a mountain goat rushed past me in pursuit of each other. I kind of felt like I was crashing their party. In the days that followed, I realized that this was nothing unusual. There is so much animal life in Eco, and none of the animals seem to be afraid of you. And they can't kill you either. It kind of seems at times like you're walking around a petting zoo, stumbling over leopards and bumping into bison. The lushness and the proximity of the life feels to me very artificial, kitschy even. A vision of the Garden of Eden bursting at the seams with life. Nature that was never real. And since dark ecology relishes in making this artificiality of our concept of nature explicit, I thought Marvell's poem here about this queer nature that is so abundant, reaching out, fondling, and tripping up the speaker, felt really apropos. The other 2 paragraphs capture a different aspect of the gameplay, and they will also be sort of what I choose to end my presentation on. These other 2 paragraphs read as follows. Meanwhile, the mind from pleasure less withdraws into its happiness. Mind, that ocean where each kind does straight its own resemblance find. It creates, transcending these, far other worlds and other seas, annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. Such was that happy garden state, while man there walked without a mate. After a place so pure and sweet, what other help could yet be meet? 'Twas beyond a mortal share to wander solitary there. Two paradises 'twere in one, to live in paradise alone. So I think this too gets at a something very fundamental to the experience of playing eco. Playing alone on a server, the world is just so bounteous. It's kind of magical how you only have to take a couple of steps and you find tomatoes, pumpkins, coconuts, wood, stone, animals, everything you could ever need. If you are many, having to share the world, that's not the case. What's difficult in eco is playing together. Once again, on the Steam community forums, there are a lot of posts about group versus solo play. And some players play alone on shared servers, where other players form little working groups with their own internal communication who achieve projects much faster. And this results in real disparities between players, where some are still hauling resources with little hand-drawn carts, while others are already driving steam-powered vehicles. And I think that this conceptualization of the environment, even if it's virtual, as a social space is very important, it's very interesting. The first survival games were always single-player games, and a lot of games that feature beautiful natural landscapes are also single-player games. But that's not the world. We share this world with other people and with countless of other critters, and we better start learning how to play together. Okay, I feel like I've gone on for more than my assigned 20-25 minutes, so I'm gonna park it there, and then maybe we can have a discussion where we can I don't know, continue this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for this talk that I feel is very fitting as the last presentation, and as in 2 days we're going to witness the end of our eco server. I feel like you set the right tone for for Monday, basically. I don't know, is there any other person? Maybe we have a couple of person in the chat. I don't know if they want to comment anything on the Discord chat. Yeah.
Can I ask something or say something?
Yeah, of course. Parrr.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I think that was wonderful. You tied the game and also like play behavior so well together, and also those theories around it, because maybe you build a bunker, perhaps that's like one type of way to see further than the destruction. But I wonder, maybe it's also you read from the Steam platform, perhaps what is how people would build up from the destruction. I'm also like curious about it, because somehow I did some workshop on word building, imagining a future planet which is built only from destruction. So
yeah, I'm as curious as you are. I've not really looked at those conversations, mostly because I don't want to spoil myself. I want to see, I wouldn't be surprised by what happens when the asteroid hits. Anna and Louise told me that it is possible to sort of keep going after after the destruction, but I kind of don't want to spoil myself, so I've kept clear from those discussions. But I agree with you that sort of that third month in eco is going to be as interesting, even maybe more interesting than the month that we've just played, because we'll be surrounded by ruins potentially.
Yeah, because also I really also feel with you about maybe the current media. We get a feeling of a lot of things going to destruction, and maybe the generation for those teenagers, they have lots of anxiety. The news they watch or things they hear are very different from how maybe I, as a slightly older generation, grew up with. So I just feel like I wish to see more like any kind of narrative not blindly, naively hopeful, but also just like how to go further than the disasters. So yeah, that's yeah. Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Maybe I'm not going to spoil anybody, so I'm not going to say too much on what's gonna happen when the world is being destroyed. What I can say is that there is more and more of the game design that is so the game designer are designing more and more items for the after the meteorite is hitting the world moment. So it seems like the user are using more and more, are playing more and more after that time, and they are more and more interested in playing after the destruction of the world. So I think I just put that comment there, and I'm not going to say more about what will happen after.
Yeah, that's so intriguing. I think that post-apocalyptic narratives have become really popular. You see them in games, you see them in films, series. And I think that's just, totally a response to a current sense of, vulnerability, a sense of an ending, a sense of sort of having reached some kind of peak. Now we're just in it for, the way down. And then the real question is not necessarily like, can we hold on? And I think the more interesting question, or like the question that we should be asking ourselves in these post-apocalyptic narratives is, we are going to have to sacrifice some things, but what are the things that you want to salvage, right? What do you want to hold on to? Is that, I don't know, is it like feminism, anti-racism, right? Class solidarity, all that stuff we cannot let go, right? We can let go of, economic growth as a marker for, national progress and shit, but we can't afford to let go of other things.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good comment. It's tying back to one of the reasons we started to doing this kind of event in video game, and particularly in video game that are interested in or dealing with the topic of post-apocalyptic world, like what kind of vision are this game deploying, and how very often it's very toxic and competitive, and there is no space for normal people. It seems, for people that are not into like killing each other and like until the end of time. So exactly, like what do you savage? I think that's a very good question, and it's very urgent to build that vision of what we want to savage and how is it going to happen, basically.
I think it's also quite interesting that as a catastrophe, something is just an asteroid that is going to crush the planet all at once, which is also quite in contrast with how the crisis we're facing is much more gradual and things are kind of slowly moving over time. It's not that we're like all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh yeah, now we're really fucked. Like it has been a slow process going on for a long time also. So in one hand they're like trying to sort of like give you tools to go through this experience and find the ways to halt it, but then on the other hand the way they kind of represent it is very different than the way we experience it.
Isn't it also Timothy Morton that talks about that idea of like the idea, and it ties that to the idea of oxygen, like oxygen is a catastrophe that is still ongoing, like the fact that oxygen was accidentally produced by a microorganism, and then tying that back to the idea of climate change, like it's an ongoing catastrophe. So it's not that it's gonna start, it's like we're in it, but it's ongoing, and it's probably going to be ongoing for a long time, basically.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, like oxygen, like since I have such an interest in deep time, the Great Oxygenation Event, right? Which in sort of deep time you can call an event, but if you zoom in, it becomes not an event, but like millions of years.
Yeah.
But that definitely was a catastrophe for like basically all life, on the planet up until that point, right? It like killed, because oxygen was toxic to those creatures, so it killed all of the like microbial life, and then made way for new life, cyanobacteria, and those made way for us, basically, right, for complex life on Earth. But it definitely is always like you're always going to be asking, like, you know, like a catastrophe for whom, right? I mean, like what we did to the speaking with a sort of problematic universal we now, but what Western financially like what Western wealthy nations have done to the world has been problematic for a lot of life forms, but it's also like been really good for crows and pigeons and like vermin and like you know, the crops that we depend on for our sustenance. Like those have sort of covered the earth, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this really, which I think is kind of telling of Paris. There's a part of in the zoo of Paris, in the middle of Paris, there's this very small zoo, and part of it is just like animals that live in a city, and it's just like rats, and you know, so they're kind of like reproducing like sewers, and which I think is kind of like showing you this absurdity, but also amazing, sort of like that's the level we're at now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really cool.
I think I'm going to.
And if you, if I could just start with like a final suggestion, since you guys are also interested in, video games and sort of crises and apocalypticism, and so yes, like to respond to you, Anna, like this game sort of like spectacularizes, right, a gradual crisis by making it into an sort of instantaneous like asteroid impact. There's also a game called Oxygen Not Included, which is a base builder, a survival game, similarly, but single player, where the crisis is sort of always ongoing and more gradual because you're always running out of oxygen and sort of building up CO2, which threatens to choke your base. And that is a sort of another game that I hope to discuss in my dissertation, which I think gives a sort of a more interesting gradualist representation of a crisis.
All right.
So we're gonna check that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should.
I think I'm gonna go above the ground again, back to the sunshine.
Get some fresh air.
Oh, it's night actually.
Where is it?
Oh, you're stuck in the in the tomb.
Okay, is there anyone that would like to add something to this? Ask any other questions, remarks, comments? No?
Yeah, then I guess it will conclude our last event. Thank you everyone for participating and making this really awesome. And
thank you Lola, Xenia and Laura for your contributions. It was really wonderful to have all these things coming together. Thanks again for tuning in. As said, we will be witnessing the end of our world on Monday, where we are gathering as a small community to see how this will happen for ourselves.
And also we will update the vision of this destruction so we're gonna upload this like a new video into the installation in the Athens Biennale, so you can see the update of the world being destroyed, basically. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in, and
Till next time.
Till next time.
Hopefully.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.